After centuries of Muslim political dominance and missionary activity, South Asia remained one of the least converted and integrated of all the areas Muhammad's message had reached. The spread of Islam to Southeast Asia. From a world history perspective, island Southeast Asia had long been mainly a middle ground. It was the zero where the Chinese segment of the Great Euro-Asian trading complex met the Indian Ocean trading zone to the west. At ports on the coast of the Malayan Peninsula, East Sumatra, and somewhat later North Java, goods from China were transferred from East Asia vessels to Arab or Indian ships. In these same ports, products from as far west as Rome were loaded onto the emptied Chinese ships to be carried to East Asia. By the 7th and 8th centuries CE, sailors and ships were areas of Southeast Asia, particularly Sumatra and Malaya, had become active in the seaborne trade of the region. Southeast Asian products had also become important exports to China, India, and the Mediterranean region. Many of these products were luxury items such as aromatic woods from the rainforests of Borneo and Sumatra, and spices such as cloves, nutmeg, and mace from the far end of the East Asian archipelago. These trading links were to prove even more critical to the expansion of Islam in Southeast Asia than they had earlier been to the spread of Buddhism and Hinduism. From the 8th century onward, the coastal trade of India came increasingly to be controlled by Muslims from such religions as Gujarat in middle western India and various parts of South India. As a result, elements of Islamic culture began to filter into island Southeast Asia, but only in the 13th century after the collapse of the far-flung trading empire of Srivijaya. Srivijaya, centered on the Strait of Malacca between Malaya and the northeast of Sumatra, map 7.4, was the way open for the widespread introduction of Islam. Indian traders, Muslim or otherwise, were welcome to trade in the chain of ports controlled by Srivijaya. But because the rulers and officials of Srivijaya were devout Buddhists, there was little incentive for the traders and sailors of Southeast Asian ports to convert to Islam, the religion of growing numbers of the merchants and sailors from India. With the fall of Srivijaya, incentives increased for the establishment of Muslim trading centers and efforts to preach the faith to the coastal peoples. Trading contacts and conversion. As in most of the areas to which Islam spread, peaceful contacts and voluntary conversion were far more important than conquest and force in spreading the faith in Southeast Asia. Throughout the islands of the region, trading contacts paved the way for conversion. Muslim merchants and sailors introduced local peoples to the ideas and rituals of the new faith and impressed on them how much of the known world had already been converted. Muslim ships also carried Sufis to various parts of Southeast Asia, where they played as vital a role in conversion as they had in India. The first areas to be won in Islam in the late 30th century were several small port centers on the northern coast of Sumatra. From these ports, the religion spread in the centuries that followed across the Strait of Malacca to Malaya. On the mainland, the key to spread conversion was the powerful trading city of Malacca, whose smaller trading empire had replaced the fallen Srivijaya. From Malacca, Islam spread along the coast of Malaya to East Sumatra and to the trading center of Demak on the north coast of Java. From Denmark, the most powerful of the trading states on North Java, the Muslim faith spread to other Javanese ports. After a long struggle with the Hindu-Buddhist kingdom in the interior, The rest of the island was eventually converted. From Denmark, Islam also carried to the Celebes, spelled Celebes, and the Spice Islands in the eastern archipelago, and from the later to Mindanao in the southern Philippines. This progress of Islamic conversion shows that port cities and coastal areas were particularly receptive to the new faith. Here, trading links were crucial. Once one of the key cities and trading cluster converted, it was in the best interest of the others to follow suit to enhance personal ties and provide a common basis in Muslim law to regulate business deals. Conversion to Islam also linked these centers, culturally as well as economically, to the merchants and ports of India, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. Islam made slow progress in areas such as Central Java, where Hindu-Buddhist dynasties contested its spread. But the fact that the earlier conversion to these Indian religions had been confirmed mainly to the ruling elites in Java and other island areas left openings for mass conversions to Islam that Sufis eventually exploited. The island of Bali, where Hinduism had taken deep root at the popular level, remained largely impervious to the spread of Islam. The same was true of most of the mainland Southeast Asia, where centuries before the coming of Islam, Buddhism had spread from India and Ceylon, spelled Ceylon, and won the fervent adherents of both the ruling elites and the peasant masses. Sufi mystics and the nature of Southeast Asian Islam. Because Islam was spread in many areas by Sufis from South Asia, it was often infused with mystical strands and incorporate animus, Hindu and Buddhist elements. Just as they had in the Middle East and India, the Sufis who spread Islam in Southeast Asia varied widely in personality and approach. Most were believed by those who followed them to have magical powers, and nearly all Sufis established mosques and school centers from which they traveled in neighboring regions to preach the faith. In winning converts, the Sufis were willing to allow the inhabitants of island Southeast Asia to retain pre-Islamic beliefs and practices that Orthodox scholars could have found contrary to Islamic doctrine. Pre-Islamic customary law remained important in regulating social interaction, whereas Islamic law was confined to specific sorts of agreements and exchanges. Women retained a much stronger position, both within the family and in society, than they had in the Middle East and India. For example, trading in local and regional markets continued to be dominated by small-scale female buyers and sellers. In such areas as western Sumatra, lineage and adherence continued to be traced through the female line after the coming of Islam, despite its tendency to promote and make male dominance and descent. Perhaps most tellingly, pre-Muslim religious beliefs and rituals were incorporated into Muslim ceremonies. Indigenous cultural staples such as the brilliant Javanese puppet shadow plays that were based on the Indian epics of the Brahminic age were refined, and they became even more central to the popular and elite beliefs and practices that they had been in the pre-Muslim era. Global connections. Islam, a bridge between worlds. Although problems of political control and succession continued to plague the kingdoms and empires that divided the Muslim world, the central position of Islamic civilization in global history was solidified during the centuries of Abbasid rule. Its role as the go-between for the more ancient civilizations of the Eastern Hemisphere grew as Arab trading networks expanded into new areas. More than ever, it enriched the lives of nomadic peoples, from the Turks and Mongols of Central Asia to the Berbers of North Africa and the camel herders of the savanna region south of the Sahara. Equally critically, Islam's original contributions to the growth and refinement of civilized life greatly increased. From its great cities and universities and the accomplishments they generated in the fine arts, sciences, and literature to its vibrant religious and philosophical life. Islam pioneered patterns of organization and thinking that would affect the development of human societies in major ways for centuries to come. For more than 5 centuries, the spread of Islam played a central role in the rise, extension, or transformation of civilization in much of the Afro-Asian world. The Islamic world also became a great conduit for the exchange of ideas, plants and medicines, commercial goods, and inventions both between centers of urban and agrarian life and between these core regions of civilization and the areas dominated by nomadic peoples that still encompass much of the globe. In the midst of all this achievement, however, there were tendencies that would put the Muslim peoples at a growing disadvantage, particularly in relation to their long-standing European rivals. Muslim divisions would leave openings for political expansion that the Europeans would eagerly exploit, beginning the island Southeast Asian extremities of the Islamic world and then moving across India. The growing orthodoxy and intolerance of the many of the Ummah, as well as the Muslim belief that vast Islamic world contained all requirements for civilized life, caused Muslim peoples to grow less receptive to outside influences and innovations. These tendencies became increasingly pronounced at precisely the time when their Christian rivals were entering a period of unprecedented curiosity, experimentation, and exploration of the world beyond their own heartlands. That is it for Chapter 7. I'm not going to read the further readings around the web because that's not part of the main text. We're done.